everyone. My name is CK Sims, and welcome to my podcast, Poddin My Noggin. This is my inaugural podcast, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a little nervous about it, and I'll tell you why. I'm 42 years old, and I live in Montreal, Canada. I'm not from here, so I don't speak French, but it's a great city. Originally from the east coast of Canada, Newfoundland. And for 42 years, I have lived in fear. Fear of pretty much everything. Uh, since I was a wee child, I have thought about putting myself out there, doing things that fill my cup and make me feel like I'm contributing somehow to society. And I love to write, so in 2008, I wrote a book. And in 2024, March 30th, it'll come out. Um, and I think this year will step back a little bit. In 2023, it was definitely a year of immense growth and a lot of discomfort for me. I was completely out of my comfort zone for the better part of the first year. And there was a lot of things happening within the position that I was working in, and I was finding that I was on a default of negative, sort of some underlining resentment and negativity, and that's not who I am as a person. So this was an issue for me, and this summer I had to do a lot of like self-reflective work and sort of kind of put things into perspective so I could reset and come back into my role as a positive person. And for me, being negative and being resentful or whatnot does not serve me and it doesn't serve anybody. But me in my positive state and feeling happy about what I'm doing and the things that I'm taking on, that serves me, and I in some ways it serves other people that I've witnessed and have been told. So, that was great. The things that happened when I did the reset and came back into myself again was my mentality started to shift, and I was thinking about how for however many years, I've been super invested in, giving my 150, 200% to the company that I'm working for. And the job was my identity, and my identity was my job. And one of the things, you know, the resentment was the level of effort and energy and hours and everything that I was putting out into this position, and it just wasn't coming back to me. So probably September-ish, towards the end, October, I started to think, well, what if I started to pour into myself the same level of effort, energy, dedication, and commitment that I give so freely to a company. And I mulled over that idea for a while. And I came to decide that I needed to do this. I needed to give it a shot. What was the worst thing that could happen? And what one of the phrases I learned in 2023 that I really like is to stop saying what is the worst that can happen, but start saying what is the best that can happen. And so in the beginning of October, I picked up writing again. I went back to blogging, which I have a blog, which is called Blogging My Noggin. Sorry, is where Poddin My Noggin comes from, on brands. And blogging regularly. I picked up my manuscript from 2008 and read it and realized, okay, well, the person I was in 2008 is definitely not the person I am today. Like, so much has happened, so much growth. Put those two people in the same room. The only similarity I think that you would actually find between those two people is that they had big dreams, big aspirations, um, wanted to do something great and wonderful. Much of the granular things of how they thought, how they felt about the world, how they felt about themselves was so different, and their viewpoints and their mentality is completely different. But I will often say that, you know, I reach back to that person in 2008 and I say thank you for getting me here safely. And I couldn't have been here without him, right? And when I first wrote this manuscript, it was in a basement apartment in Ontario. Uh, I was in between jobs and I, really started to sort of just bring about the life of Bonita Smith. And there's so much of that Bonita Smith that has me in it. And there's elements of me throughout all of that book. And so now, as I've, gone through that book and started to edit and rewrite it a little bit and then like change a few things just so that it fits more of who I am today, but still holds true the original thought idea of the 27-year-old CK as opposed to the 42-year-old CK. Yeah, so that's coming out, on March 30th, 2024. So I'm excited about that. So these are the things that I started to do, and I wanted to explore ways of perhaps earning passive income, and I wanted to delve deeper into investing uh, and just pouring into myself. So we fast forward, that was, October. We fast forward to November 29th, that long after, about 2 months. Uh, and I show up to work, there's something off, and I can feel it. And the next thing I know, I'm being called into a meeting, and I was packaged out that day from my organization based on restructuring. And so initially, I felt I was shocked, absolutely. Our whole department was packaged out, but I was shocked, and I was I don't know. I don't really know what I was in that moment because it happened so quickly. But I soon just sort of I pretty quickly processed what was going on in my mind and framed it. And how I framed it at that time is that maybe the universe was removing something from my path to really give me the shove to put myself out there and do the things that I've always dreamt of doing. And then that still holds true today. Over the holidays, I got really sick with a cold, and there's remnants of it still right now, which you can probably hear in my voice. Uh, and being sick with a cold had me sleeping and napping and spending a lot of time just on the couch under a blanket. And there was sort of a forced reflection. And what I realized is that while I still view being packaged out as being a great thing and an excellent opportunity to open the door for new and exciting chapters, I didn't allow myself to grieve that loss, and it was a loss. And I had to pause and sort of reflect on just the overall fact that my plans had changed, like I had Um, you know, in my head, I was going to retire at this company, so another 23 years at least. This was, somewhere I wanted to continue to move up. And there were a lot of really wonderful and incredible people that work there that are now no longer a part of my normal everyday life. So, that being said, there was a process of grieving that loss over the holidays. And I'm feeling a lot better physically and mentally about it at this point, but it's still something that happened. And I do still believe that the universe was moving something out of the way. for me to step up into something different. And what that may be, I'm not sure. I'm open to receiving. I know that regardless of what 2024 brings, I'm going to do this podcast. I'm going to continue blogging. I'm going to continue writing my books. I have so many that are like half written or quarter written. A lot of others that are brainstorms and don't have a structure yet. So that is where I'm going to be pouring a lot of my energy. If I have to find a position somewhere to keep myself going and all of that stuff, they'll get, my best from when I start to when I finish. And then I'm just open to whatever 2024 brings my way. So I've talked a lot about what sort of brought me here. And I think that ultimately this is, the 31st of December, New Year's Eve. There's a lot of people are out partying and bringing in the year. So yeah, so here we are, December 31st, 23. A lot of people are actually out. We're planning to ring in the new year. I will most likely be asleep midnight. I'm not a night owl. I am a morning bird, early bird. And I'm pretty routine in life. I like to go to bed by 10, up by 6 in the morning. Relatively boring, I would say. So I'm looking at Poddin my Noggin and blogging my Noggin and thinking about what the future holds and what this podcast will represent for me and what I hope that it'll represent for people who find it and listen to it. So one of the main topics we're going to discuss a lot is mental health. I am a huge advocate for mental health, primarily because I've been in it. I've struggled immensely for a large portion of my life, almost called it quits when I was 35. Thankfully, now I was not successful in doing that. At the time, however, I didn't feel that way, right? So at the time that this all went down, I had spent 3 to 4 years in complete and utter darkness. And there's this sense of hopelessness that you don't really understand unless you're in it. And I remember this makes me think about Williams. And, he died by suicide. I'm trying to be politically correct. And I always wondered, like, how did that happen? And especially for someone like Robin Williams, who was so successful and always so funny and all of these things, like, what was going on for them to take their lives? And I now know what that feels like and what that looks like. And so for me, like I said, it was 3 or 4 years in complete and utter darkness. What I mean by that is that it's just there was no light, and I still went to work. I still had a job. I moved through the motions. There was no light. There was nothing that created joy in me. And there might be a moment, a very fleeting, passing moment of joy that would happen, and then it would be crushed again by the darkness. And the one thing that really sort of made me struggle the most was the hopelessness. And the hopelessness is sort of like thinking to yourself, something like right now, like say I was going to go book a trip to California and spend 2 weeks, in Malibu. That right now would be something that's like that sounds amazing. Let's go do it. Let's go explore all the landmarks. Let's create that core memory of doing something like that. The sun on my skin when it's winter out, like that sort of thing. When you're in hopelessness, you don't fire off that way. So someone says, let's go book a trip to California or anywhere, and your mind automatically says, what's the point? I'm still going to be sad. I'm still going to be surrounded by darkness. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. Because at the end, like nothing means anything. There's no point in having a good time because like it really just doesn't mean anything. Nothing means anything. And that's where I was. That's where people get is every piece of life, every part of what makes life beautiful just becomes meaningless. It's a void. It is darkness. And I remember it was a long time. Um, the week before I pushed my best friend away, I distanced myself from people, and then I made a choice with resolve. And it was in that period of making a choice with resolve that I had the most clarity. I felt the clearest I had ever had. I felt there was a peace that I never possessed. And it was the resolution to say, I'm ending this and I'm doing it on my terms. There's no point in living, and I don't want to live if this is what life is. You analyze all of the things for people. How, are they going to do this? How are they going to cope with this? What's going to happen here? I had it all figured out, right? Down to where I was going to do it to prevent less mess. It was all figured out. And I failed, and I went to stay for a short period, 3 days in a mental health institution on under observation and saw a lot of, psychiatric nurses and doctors and psychologists and social workers and everything during that period. And I remember I was in the room, I had my own room, and I was upset that I failed. I was upset that I didn't have the resolution that I was hoping for. And so I'm sitting there, and in my mind, I'm thinking I just need to pretend that I'm okay and convince them that I'm okay so they can let me go. And then I will go and make sure that this is the last time. It'll be more accurate. I'm trying to refrain from being graphic. So that was that. And it was the second day I was in there. I don't remember their name. A male nurse came in, a male doctor or nurse, I'm not sure. I was pretty out of it. And I remember him asking me, just very relaxed, like, what's going on? And in that moment, I opened up and I spoke to him about everything. And the primary piece that I was continuing to say was that I'm just tired. Like I'm exhausted. I'm tired of trying to stay above water. And that was the case. I was tired. Every day was a fight to function, to keep myself moving, to pretend that I was okay. And so um, that individual that day said 3 words that changed my whole life. And I mean this. They said, CK, just stop swimming. In the moment, I thought, what? That makes no sense. If I stop swimming, then I am giving in. I'm letting it consume me. I'll just be consumed by darkness. And in my mind at that moment also I was thinking, well, that's what I was trying to do, is stop swimming. And I don't remember much about that interaction afterwards. I just remember being in my room and being alone and thinking to myself, just stop swimming. Like, what a weird thing to say. And then it hit me. Stop trying, was what he was saying. Stop trying to be okay. Stop fighting against the feelings, the emotions, the sadness. Surrender. And later I would learn that that is radical acceptance. Radically accept that I am sad, that I am not wired like other people, that I have depression, and that this is my life. And I remember being in that room in the hospital and starting to think, and I'm like, I've never done that before. I've done everything I could have ever thought of, but I had never done that before. And I'm like, but that can't be it, right? Like, that can't be it, to just stop swimming, to just not fight it. And I remember speaking to um, I, a psychiatrist or psychologist, and talking about that. And it was later in the day, and this one was a woman, and she said, "Well, that's your starting point, is to accept that this is where you are. You burn so much of your energy trying to fight against being depressed and being sad that you have no energy left for anything else. So if you stop swimming, then you'll actually have some energy to focus on different therapies or different approaches." And one of the approaches that was introduced to me at that time was CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And the one thing that I was charged with focusing on was changing my inner dialogue. And my inner dialogue for 35 years was just an absolute dumpster fire. And I thought of and talked so poorly to myself that no wonder I was the depressed. And so I decided on the third day that I'm going to try to stop swimming and to work on changing my inner dialogue. I hadn't done it before, and the truth is, I didn't want to die. I just wanted the darkness to stop. Right? And I thought that that was the only option at that time. So I go home, and I had to think of things. So like I said, dumpster fire, inner dialogue. I had to focus on every thought that I was having, and I had to take it and then switch it around and make it neutral, at least positive if I could. So, thought that could be like, um, I'm just trying to think of a good example. Because I don't think this way anymore. So it's one of those things, thinking back to try and remember all of the trash talk that I had to myself. So if I were to mispronounce a person's name, I'm thinking if this is something that I would fear of doing now. But back then, my immediate response would be, "You are an idiot, worthless. You are a piece of shit. You probably have just ruined any possibility of interacting with that individual ever again because you destroyed their name." And it would just be this onslaught of just awful talk. And it was everything. It was everything. If my printing didn't turn out right, if I was writing something, if I, maybe put a little bit too much ingredient in something, or I forgot something that someone asked of me, or um, like the silliest, simplest things would turn into this internal barrage of shit talking. And like it was ugly, it was unkind, and it was messy. So, one of the things that I had to do was start to catch those thoughts. And I was extra, not going to lie. Sometimes I'm extra. And I would literally just physically have the thought and be like, grab it. And then I look at it and I'd acknowledge that that thought was not kind. And I would say, okay, we're going to rephrase this thought, and it's going to be, you made a mistake pronouncing that person's name. You apologized. You're allowed to make mistakes. And then I release it back inside. And it sounds cheesy. Don't get me wrong. As I'm doing it right now, I'm like, oh, that's a bit cheesy. But that's what I did. And so all day, every day, you could see me grabbing thoughts, looking at them, and reframing them, and then putting them back in to at least being a neutral thought. You'd want to try and make it a positive thought. So that, because I wasn't fighting being sad, I was just accepting that I was sad. That's where my energy went. And the psychiatrist also told me to visualize my inner self as a child that feels that they're a failure, and visualize that child as being outside of yourself. It's a part of you, but it's outside of yourself. So before you speak to that child, think about what you would do if you were to see a 3-year-old sitting, standing, walking, talking, and talking to themselves that way. What would you do if they made a mistake? What would you do if they fell or dropped a glass or tripped up? Anything. How would you respond to them? And my default, obviously, for a child at 3 years old, is you're going to coddle them and coo them and make sure that they're okay and that they know that it's okay to make mistakes. And I'm going to show them so much kindness. And so that is what I had to do for myself. And so I did, religiously, every day, hundreds of times a day. Every thought I could possibly catch, I caught. I looked at it, like held it, looked at it, and I rephrased it to be at least neutral. most often positive, always kind. And I remember it was about 6 months later. I remember the day, I don't remember the date. I remember where I was. I was walking out of my bedroom. Um, and it was close to bedtime because it was around this time as well that I realized I treated my body like a dumpster fire and had no schedule or circadian sleep rhythm, nothing. So that's when the 10 o'clock bedtime, 6 o'clock rises started. And I remember getting ready for bed and going through my pre bed routine. And I was walking out of the bedroom, most likely to get a glass of water. And it hit me right then, right there. And it was the coolest feeling I'd ever felt. And I realized in that moment that I hadn't had a negative thought that entire day. And I remember searching in my mind for a moment where I would have had to catch a thought and put it back inside. And throughout that whole day, I didn't have a negative thought. So I was pretty stoked. And now I can say to you at 42, so 7 years later, almost eight, that my default thought process is positive. And one of the things, the cool sort of call outs that I have to make is that I still have anxiety and I still have fear and I still catastrophize things. Um, and I overthink things and overanalyze things. That is a part of who I am. I've radically accepted that. But how I speak to myself is completely different. I show myself kindness, and because I show myself kindness, I show the world kindness. And why mental health will be a big topic on this podcast is because everyone deserves kindness, and everyone deserves to know that it's going to be okay. Regardless of what situation you're in, everything passes. And I want to take this opportunity in my life and use this platform to bring some light, uplift people, perhaps even teach people that there is a way to be better for yourself. And I remember 2, 3 years ago, I'm in Montreal, I'm driving around the city, it's summer, the windows are down, the air is blowing in, I've got my music up, and I'm just smiling from ear to ear. And for no reason. There was nothing that happened within that time frame to make me smile. I was smiling because I was radiating joy, because I felt great, and because I often think about where I've been and where I am now. And gratitude plays a huge part in that. I'm grateful even for the ups and downs. Like, you need the both to experience the full spectrum of life. Life is beautiful because you have the ups and downs, you have the good and bad. It's what we do with those, how we perceive those ultimately is what frames our mindsets. And this, all of that has led me here today on December 31st, recording my first ever podcast at my home in Montreal and sharing it with you. Terrified, I was able to talk myself down enough to say, okay, you're just filming right now. Like, you're just filming. You can relax. You can have a conversation with yourself and be yourself. And you don't have to think about putting it out until like next week. So just film it, right? So we have to start somewhere. And if you're out there today and you have something that you have wanted to do all of your life, start doing it today. Don't put it off. You're never going to be perfect. You're never going to be 100% ready. No perfect moment's going to come along and be like, oh, this is it. You just got to do it. And I often think about if I had poured into myself in 2008 and allowed that younger version of myself the freedom of making mistakes, opening himself up to potential ridicule, but also opening himself up to potential praise, opening himself up to opportunities. Where would I have been in the book writing world 15 years later? How many books would I have written? Would I have been published by a major publishing house? Would I have self-published? Would I have earned enough of money to live on just my book earnings? What opportunities would have come from that? And fear is what robs me of ever knowing the answer to that question. But fear will not be what robs me of knowing it going forward. Because doing this podcast, recording this video, putting myself out there, it is crazy nerve-wracking. I am sure that there's going to be a ton of people out there who are going to have hateful comments, but I think there's going to be as equal many people who are going to like what I'm doing. So I'm ready. I'm ready for whatever. And it's really about doing something that I feel proud of and can say, you know what, I did that. I didn't let fear stand in my way, and I did that. So mental health is going to be a huge topic on this podcast. And it's not going to be always like the doom and gloom stuff. It's going to be like, it's going to be very, very varied across the spectrum. Another personal passion of mine is leadership. We're going to be talking about leadership on Poddin, my Noggin. What it takes to be a great leader. Are you a leader or a boss? What are those differences? That sort of thing. I'm going to be doing interviews. I want to talk to people who have stories to tell. And I want to talk to everyday folk, just like myself, who have faced hardship and have turned the tides. And what have their lessons been? What do they want you to know they used in their life to succeed? And I think we need to hear these stories more and more from people that look like us, talk like us, work like us, dream like us, that are very much like us, that we can hear and learn and grow. I'm all about growth. We will talk about social issues. I will avoid politics and religion. I have strong opinions on both, but I want this to be a happy podcast. Not necessarily a happy podcast where we're only talking about jokes and things, but like a podcast that you can listen to and walk away from maybe feeling a little bit lighter, or that you've learned something or you felt something. I'm going to talk about books and authors. I love reading as much as I like writing. I love reading. I have read 74 and a half books. This year, my target was 75. I have a few hours left to see if I can reach my 75 goal. And I feel like I'm going to, but, until it's done, it's done. And it's just going to be a little bit of everything. Next week's episode of Poddin' My Noggin will be having my first interview guest, which I am over the moon excited about. She is a talented young woman, photographer, joining to talk about what drives her, how she overcomes the noise. We'll talk about the um, Instagram reel that caught my attention for this woman and just immediately drew me in. And I'm just really excited to have my first interview guest. So this is going to be a really cool experience for me. And from what I've heard from her, this will be her first podcast as well. So we'll get through it together and we'll figure it out as we go. Uh, as for me and the interim, I thank you for listening to this podcast today. Yes, definitely looking forward to next episode for that interview. Until then, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at author CK Sims. You can watch the video version of this on YouTube under the same handle. And you can head over to cksims.com to check out my blog, show me some love, me a message. If you're interested in being a sponsor of Poddin My Noggin, you can reach out to me in my DMs on Instagram. And until next time, I just want you to be kind to yourself. Thanks for tuning in. Talk soon.